Okay, now let's talk about chapter two. It talks about money and actually mainly talks about paper money. The title reads as such, of money considered as a particular branch of the general stock of the society or of the expense of maintaining the national capital. So what it means is you can see money in two ways, right? You can see it as a part of the general stock of the society or part of the expense of maintaining the national capital. Some key points of this chapter. Adam Smith makes the distinction between gross and net revenue of a nation and how paper money increases the net revenue of a nation, as well as how paper money is created and regulated in different parts of the UK. And lastly, he argued that the amount of paper money should be limited and also proposed some ways of limiting it. Okay, first key point, the distinction between gross and net revenue. The gross revenue of a nation is just the annual produce of this nation. And to get the net revenue, right, you need to subtract the maintenance of capital from the gross revenue, right? Or in other words, net revenue is what you can save, what you can put in for the stock for immediate consumption without sacrificing your fixed or circulating capital. Okay. But he also argued that the maintenance of capital, right, only consists of the maintenance of money and the maintenance of fixed capital. The maintenance of the other three parts of circulating capital is not to be deducted. And the reasoning is such. Let's go back a little bit. So circulating capital, you see, it's money, right? As well as provision, material, and completed work in the hands of the seller. The other three, right, once they are sold, they either turn into fixed capital or turn into something for immediate consumption, right? So in the one case, if they turn into fixed capital, then whatever cost, right, has been incurred in maintaining them in the hands of the seller would be reflected in the price, would be included in the price paid by the buyer, right? And in this way, after they are sold, right, this price would be the maintenance of fixed capital. That's why you should not include that part of the cost into the maintenance of the capital, right? Because if you include that, then you are accounting this cost twice, right? Once in the hands of the seller and twice in the hands of the buyer. And how about if they are turning into something for immediate consumption? Then, well, whatever labor, whatever toil being put into something at the time when they are sold, it will be value added to this piece of commodity, right? Because value consisted in the amount of labor put into this commodity. So it will actually be reflected in the value of the stock for immediate consumption after they are sold. Hence, should not be included in the cost of maintaining capital. That's just kind of my extended reasoning based on his statement that these should not be included. Okay, so yeah, so that left with only money and a fixed capital, right? So the maintenance of money need to be deducted. So yeah, to maintain money, right? At that time, when money is considered as gold and silver, a certain quantity of material, right, mainly gold and silver, and labor, instead of being employed in augmenting the stock reserved for immediate consumption, is employed in creating gold and silver money. And also, if you count money as wait, what? Anyways, that's a minor point. Let's skip that. Okay, maintenance of money needs to be deducted. Let's go on. Now next he compares the savings in the maintenance of fixed capital versus the saving in the maintenance of money and how these benefit society. They benefit society in different ways. Let's just put it out that way, right? So savings in the maintenance of the fixed capital, right, would mean less spent on maintaining the fixed capital, and assuming total capital being the same, more can be spent on circulating capital, right? And circulating capital is the fund for raising materials to work upon, right? As well as paying the wages of laborers. That means more being spent on circulating capital, then more industry can be put into motion. Did I say fixed capital? Yeah, what I mean is circulating capital is the fund for raising materials and for maintaining laborers. Yep. Okay, so that's how saving in the maintenance of fixed capital benefits society. How does the savings in the maintenance of money benefit society, right? So, paper money, they cost less, right, than gold and silver money. That does not need any further explanation. And the next statement is paper money turns dead stock into productive capital. What does this mean, right? Well, gold and silver money, right? Money, what money means in that time back then, circulating in a country, right? They only help circulating goods, right? But they themselves do not add any extra produce. They do not produce anything extra for the nation. But by the means of paper money, they can, however, acquire some extra goods for the nation. And that's how it works. Let's suppose there's, well, because Adam Smith is British, that's why we use pounds, right? So let's suppose there's 1 million pounds worth of gold and silver circulating in a country, right? That's the state of things before the introduction of paper money. Then paper money created, right? 1 million banknotes created in that country. And then to answer some occasional demands for some people who present the banknote back to the bank to asking for gold and silver back, right? So that's how banknotes work back then, right? It's a promissory note. It says, Mr. or Mrs. So-and-so is being promised this much gold and silver once they present this note back to the bank, and the bank is obliged to pay them this amount of gold or silver money. Anyways, that being explained, let's just say 1 million banknotes created, and then 200,000 gold and silver. So that's 1/4 of the denomination of the paper money is to be kept in reserve to answer these occasional demands for gold and silver, right, from these banknote holders, bearers. And then what does the remaining 800,000 pounds do, right? Those extra gold and silver, what can they do? They can now be sent abroad to either support foreign consumption or home consumption, right? So when they're supporting foreign consumption, that means buying from one foreign nation and selling these goods to another foreign nation, the profits being made would be an addition to the net revenue of the country. So that's one way how the paper money, right, can benefit the country. And the other way is they can be spent in home consumption, right? So buying foreign goods for home consumption. There this part can be either spent on luxuries. Well, then that's not productive, or they can be spent on buying materials, tools, and provisions for industrious peoples, right? For the working class. Does enable further increase of national revenue later on, right? Because the more things, more provisions, more materials you can support the working class with, then in the future they should be able to produce more, right? Common sense. And what's the last point? Oh, yeah. But Adam Smith also argued that with all these benefits, right? However, paper money is less secure, right? Why is that? Because back then, the money system is not like modern day, right? Modern day is fiat money. The paper money itself is decreed by law to have this value on their denomination, right? But that's not the case back then in the ancient time, right? Back then, the only reason that paper money is being recognized as having some value is because it's being backed up by the bank reserve, by the gold and silver reserve in the bank. So let's imagine a scenario where the treasury, right, that supports this paper money has been taken away, right? Or let's say it's being under the control of an enemy who invaded your country and took your capital. And now they have control over the silver and gold reserve that back up your paper money. And now all of a sudden, you cannot get gold and silver for your banknote. It may become worthless if the enemy takes these gold and silver away as some kind of war indemnity or something, right? Then that would cause huge confusion in a country where most of the currency are in paper. So that's why we need to control the amount of paper money, right? That's how Adam Smith argued. And also you may wonder, right? Why does the 1 million banknote has to stay in the country and not being sent abroad, right? Well, that's because as Adam Smith explained, right? Paper money back then, right, was in the form of most likely banknotes, right? And if being sent abroad, right, first due to the distance from these banks, right? Say you have a banknote from the Bank of England and you send it all the way to Poland. Now the person in Poland with this banknote, what does he do if he wants to get gold and silver for this banknote? He has to send this banknote back to England, right? And then get money. That's very inconvenient. It doesn't really make much sense. And also, it's the jurisdiction of the home country, right, that enforces the payment for money for this banknote, right? The King of Poland cannot force the Bank of England to pay you to pay you this much money with the banknote, right? It just doesn't work. That's why it has to stay in the country. And also, this concept of keeping some kind of money in reserve, it still applies till this day, right? A lot of the central banks actually have a reserve requirement for the banks in that country, right? They have to keep a certain proportion of cash in their coffers, right? In their vault. They cannot just keep lending, extending more credit than a certain limit. Okay, let's talk about paper money in England and Scotland. So back in those times, right, as explained by Adam Smith, at least in his time, in the time of writing, most of the paper money were created by discounting bills of exchange. So what is a bill of exchange? A bill of exchange involves three parties: the drawer, the payer, and the payee. The drawer draws the bill, and that obliges the payer to pay the payee at some certain specified time in the future with a certain specified amount, right? And what does it mean to discounting a bill of exchange? That is when the payee wants to get money early, right? Say the bill says A needs to pay B 100 pounds in 2 months, but B does not want to wait 2 months. B wants the money now. So what can B do, right? Say B lives in London, then he can present this bill to the Bank of England and say, hey, Bank of England, please pay me now, right? I need money right now. I don't wait 2 months. Then Bank of England will say, okay, sure, I can do that, but in order for me to pay you in advance, I'm gonna have to take away part of the money, right? Because what do I have to gain if I just pay you everything, right? Then I gain nothing from this transaction. So this is what I will do. I will charge you, I will discount this bill of exchange, right? I will advance to you 98 pounds, right? Instead of 100 pounds. And when this bill is being paid, I get 100 pounds, right? So in the end, I make two pounds from this transaction, and you get money early. Everybody happy. So that's what it means by discounting bills of exchange, and that's the way how most paper money was created in Europe back then, according to Adam Smith. But what's special about the Scotch banks, right? The Scottish banks is that they have something called cash accounts, which is kind of similar to modern day credit card, right? So how the cash account works is they would grant credit to customers on pretty easy terms, right? So that increased the availability of paper money in Scotland, right? So they would lend to their customers on pretty easy terms, and the money being lent was in the form of paper money. And when the customers, right, when they return the borrowers, when they return this money, they do not have to pay all at once very fast, right? They can pay in a piecemeal fashion over a very long period of time, just like how credit card works right nowadays. So that allows the merchants in Scotland to carry on more business than they would have been able to, right? So Adam Smith gave an example of a London merchant versus Edinburgh merchant, Edinburgh being the capital of Scotland. The London merchant must always keep by him a considerable sum of money to answer demands for payments of goods he has purchased upon credit, right? But the Edinburgh merchant does not need to do that. Whenever there was such occasional demand for payment on things that he purchases on credit, rather than paying gold and silver upfront, he can just ask the bank, right, his bank, to give him a loan on his cash account, right, and then repay the bank later in piecemeal fashion. And in this way, right, he does not need to keep a significant amount of money by his side, and this amount of money can be used to in his regular operations, right, in his circulating capital, fixed capital, whatnot, and thus his business is being extended further than it could have been. And Adam Smith has remarked that the business of Scotland is almost entirely carried on by means of paper money. And two banks that contributed the most to the creation of paper money in Scotland as mentioned by Adam Smith, are Bank of Scotland established in 1694, and then Royal Bank of Scotland established in 1727. And also, I guess Bank of England can be considered as their predecessor, and it was established in 1694. And they also act as a central bank for England. More on that later. So here, that's not from the book, of course. That's just some pictures I took from Bank of England museum. So on the left, just to show you how banknotes look like back then, right? So on the left, it's a 50-pound note issued by the Bank of England in 1732. You can see that it's mostly printed, but looks like part of it is written. No, yeah, probably. Anyways, but yeah, it's probably partly written and partly printed. But then, as you can see, this 5-pound note, right, in 1855, everything is printed. There's nothing is written. Just kind of show you the progress of paper money in ancient time. Okay. Then Adam Smith went on to discuss why there should be a upper limit to the amount of paper money. One reason I already mentioned is that paper money is less secure than gold and silver, right? And there are other reasons too. So what should be the upper limit then? The upper limit should be the amount of gold and silver required to circulate, or I should say the denomination of all the gold and silver coins, all the gold and silver money required to circulate goods in a nation should be the upper limit to the amount of paper money should be issued in this nation. Why is that, right? Because if it's more, then following his train of logic, the excess paper having no use in the economy, right? Because it's more than what's required to circulate all the goods in this country. The excess amount of paper would be returned to the bank for gold and silver, right? Because that something has real value, right? Not just a piece of paper. But if people keep presenting these banknotes to the bank and asking for gold and silver back, right? What's going to happen? Perhaps at some point, the bank's coffer is running low and it has some difficulty of making this payment. And such delay and difficulty will alarm people and trigger a bank run. And this bank run would make the payment even more difficult. And this bank run then become more severe. So you enter a vicious cycle. That's not a situation you want to run into, right? And that will, that's very bad for the bank, right? The banks need to spend a lot of money. The bank's cost of keeping and replenishing the coffer increase, right? And then people's life has been disturbed. Just not a good state to be in, right? More than the excess. Yeah. So if that scenario happened, right, then the money required in reserve is actually more than the amount of excess paper money, right? Because the bank run, the alarm, the alert being triggered will force people, will drive people to take more money out of the bank than the amount of excess paper money, right? So that's pretty bad. And Adam Smith has given an example, right? So for example, the Bank of England, right, has issued probably more paper money than it should. And as a result, many people were presenting the paper to the bank to ask for gold back, right? And as a result, Bank of England is running very low on gold. So it frequently bought gold bullions at £4 per ounce and issued in coins at £3 17 and 10.5 pence per ounce, right? So it's buying expensive and selling, issuing cheap, right? Selling cheap, basically losing money. And I guess you may ask, right, why wouldn't printing more paper, why would the excess paper have no use, right? Why wouldn't printing more paper just trigger inflation? Well, here's my kind of my reasoning, right? Issuing too much paper in those times would not degrade the value of gold and silver coin, right? Because they are two things back then. The paper, it does not have any intrinsic value in those times, right? The only reason they have value is because they were backed by silver and gold. So issuing more paper perhaps would only degrade the value of the paper, right? But not the gold and silver that's backing them. And when you issue too much, right, then that paper, right, having less value, people don't want them. So that's why they want gold and silver back, right? So there would be inflation, but it's the inflation of the paper note, not inflation of the currency, gold and silver currency that backs up the paper. Okay, I hope I explained it clear enough, right? So you issue too much paper value become worthless. You want to get gold and silver back. Okay, cause of excessive circulation of paper money. So how the heck did the UK end up with an excessive amount of paper money in the time when Wealth of Nations was written? It was mainly due to overtrading of some bold projectors. Projectors, as I understand, are those entrepreneurs who take on risky projects, which may or may not, and frequently not, have very good return on investment, right? Or some speculators who invest in very risky things. I guess venture capitalism back in those days. Anyways, so yeah, and he talks about an interesting way of raising money back then. When a bank was discounting real bill of exchange only, there would be no excessive circulation of paper money. Why is that? Because whatever being discounted away, right, to the payee of the bill, would be paid back by the payer, right, along with interest. So what's being flowing out from the bank, right, those paper money, will be coming back to this bank. If this gap balance is being kept, then of course there will be no excessive circulation. But here's a but, right? Some projectors, right? Some businessmen, some traders, they come up with a way to trick the banking system and keep getting more money out of the bank than what they return to the bank. This is called the practice of drawing and redrawing. So what happens is two people, right? Two merchants or two traders, whatever you call them, two businessmen, they draw bill of exchange on each other. And then they would discount this bill of exchange very regularly before they are due, right? So A draws a bill on B, and before this bill becomes due, B draws a bill on A, and then A draws a bill on B again. And each and every of these bill would have what's the word? Would have compounding interest, right? So each bill is bigger than the next one. And as you discount these bills, right, the bank keeps issuing out paper money to these people, and then then whatever they pay back to the bank, right, is always less than the next bill they're gonna discount from the bank, right? Because each and every bill has interest and commission added onto them. So if two people, right, are doing this on each other with the same bank, it's of course easy to detect, but they are smarter than that. So the common practice back then was to have a circle of projectors, circle of businessmen, right? A draws bill on C, C draws bill on B, B draws bill on D, D draws bill on E, and E draws bill on A. And this circle kind of continues, right? And then A draws another bill on C, B draws another bill on D draws another bill on E draws another bill on A. And this process can continue for many months or even years, right? And then the bank keep issuing more than what they get back in payment. And these people, since they are taking on risky projects, a lot of time they do not get the return they want, right? And then they end up in bankruptcy, and whatever bank are dealing with them are gonna be ruined too. So when the banks in UK, right, I guess especially the Scottish banks, discover this practice, they started making discounting more difficult, and that enraged these projectors, and they protested. And to appease them, a new bank called the Ayr Bank. That's not the actual name of the bank, but since this bank was in Ayr, so it's called the Ayr Bank. The Ayr Bank was established to grant easy credit to these businessmen, and and then these customers, right, these businessmen, they stopped being customers for their old banks, and then they all went to the Ayr Bank to borrow money to carry on their project. But then that eventually ended in the credit crisis of 1772, and the Ayr Bank was destroyed. And but lucky for the other banks of Scotland, right? These people who are doing drawing and redrawing has left these banks. So when these people were bankrupt, these Scottish banks were not affected. So I guess that's one positive effect of the Ayr Bank. So that's one thing, right? Over trading led to the excessive circulation of paper money, and the other one is the prevalence of small banknote. It also led to excess paper money, right? So for example, in London, right, where banknotes are 10 pounds or above, the paper money almost end up exclusively in the dealing between business to business, but not among business to customers. And in Scotland, where banknotes are 20 shillings or above, right? So yeah, I think 20 shilling is pretty much 1 pound. Anyways, yeah. So you see the denomination is much smaller. So as a result, paper money is a lot more prevalent in Scotland than in England. And in North America, right, where banknotes can be as small as 1 shilling, right, the proportion of paper money is even greater. So how do you control the amount of paper money to the upper limit that's being stated before, right? Which is whatever is required to circulate the amount of the goods in this country. Well, first thing, the banks should require frequent and regular payments from their customers, right, from their borrowers. Because if a person cannot make frequent and regular payment, then that means this person is not to be trusted. And why the heck should you keep lending them more paper money, right? You shouldn't. The other thing is issuing notes of large denomination only, right? Then in this way, you would confine the circulation of paper money only among business to business, among dealers to dealers, never among dealers to customers, or among the customers themselves. In this way, the amount of paper money should be will not be too much. And then to specifically when lending to to individual merchants, right? The banks should not advance to them more than what's necessary for the occasional payments on purchases made on credit, purchase upon credit. So why did he emphasize occasional payments, right? I guess it's to distinguish occasional versus regular operations, right? So these occasional payments, right, they will not be too much, and they should be able to be paid back, right? These occasional loans made in paper money to these merchants would be paid back, right, by some occasional sales that these merchants made. And hence, whatever paper money being flowing out from these banks would be replenished by pretty much the same amount of paper money back to these banks. But and also in a timely manner too. But if the bank's loans cover more than this amount and extend into the greater part of a merchant's circulating or fixed capital, right, the return might be way too slow, right? Sometimes, say a merchant is carrying trade between Poland and England, right? It may take a year or even longer for the return on the circulating capital to come back. And when it comes to fixed capital, right, say you buy a very expensive machine, and then perhaps only after a very long time did this machine bring you some return that covers its cost. So it doesn't make too much sense for banks back then to extend more credit than more than what's needed for some occasional payments. All right, so to recap, right? First, net revenue is gross revenue minus the maintenance of capital. And then the maintenance capital consists of only the maintenance of fixed capital and the maintenance of paper. And then paper money turns that stock into productive capital because now a lot of the domestic exchanges, domestic transactions being carried on using paper money. The extra gold and silver can be sent abroad and acquire some revenue for the nation. Upper limit for the amount of paper money should be the amount of money required to circulate the annual produce of that nation. If it's more than that, the paper money became the value of the paper money will be smaller, right? And people would be running to the bank and exchanging the paper money for asking to get gold and silver from these banknotes. Yeah, and also banks should not extend credit too easily on too lenient terms. Otherwise, speculators, high risk lovers will get a good portion of the money, right? The resources of the nation, and waste away these resources. And Adam Smith also mentioned some ways of control the amount of paper money. So the kind of the main story of this chapter has already been finished. What's left are some comments worth making, some observations, right? So one thing is the value of the paper money, right? So Adam Smith mentioned that if the paper money is payable on demand, right? Once you present the notes to the bank, they pay you the gold and silver. In this case, the value of this paper money is equal to the gold and silver currency that backs it up. Otherwise, it will be lower, right? So for example, a lot of the banknotes in the Scottish banks, they had something called the optional clause. What does it mean? So the bankers who issue these notes, they had the option, right? It's up to them to either advance gold and silver upfront when they are presented with the banknote, or pay their customers 6 months later, along with some interest, right? So this delay, right, devalues the paper money from these Scotch banks, about 4% lower than gold and silver money, and of the same denomination. And the government papers in North America, it's even more ridiculous. You can't exchange the paper for gold and silver in many cases until many years later after the paper is issued, right? So as a result, 100 pounds sterling from Great Britain was often considered equal to sometimes 130 pounds of paper money in North America, or in some regions, even 11,000 pounds. So yeah, you see the ratio 1 to 11, very, very ridiculous. But the governments of North America did something to salvage the value for their paper money. They allow the payment of these paper money for taxes, right? So that gives some value to this paper money. And last remark that I want to make for this chapter is central bank. So the Bank of England back then can be considered some early form of central bank. This is a quote from the book, right? The Bank of England, it's not just a regular bank, it also acts as a great engine of state. It receives and pays government debts. It circulates exchequer bills, and also advances to the government land and malt taxes. Anyways, yeah. So very interesting, right? You can see a lot of the modern financial instruments, financial institutions, and so on, and banking practices already taking shape more than 200 years ago, which is pretty fascinating.